I'm Jessica, 30 years old, and I just discovered something that shattered my understanding of family. Growing up, money was always tight for me. I worked through high school and took on massive student debt while my brother had everything handed to him. Yesterday, at my grandmother's birthday dinner, she innocently asked, "How are you spending your monthly trust payments?" I was confused. "What payments?" I replied. Her face fell as she said, "The $1,500 you've been receiving since you were 18, your college fund from your grandfather." I never saw a penny of it. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever felt like the unfavored child in your family. I was 8 years old when my grandfather William passed away. He was a kind, hardworking man who had built a successful construction business from the ground up. While not extraordinarily wealthy, he believed strongly in education and financial responsibility. I remember sitting on his lap as he told stories about starting with nothing but his toolbox and determination. "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take from you, Jessie girl," he would say, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. He'd finally quit too late. My relationship with Grandpa Will was special. I was his first grandchild and had his same blue eyes and stubborn streak. He would sneak me peppermint candies when Mom wasn't looking and taught me how to play chess on Sunday afternoons after family dinners. My brother Scott came along when I was 6. By then, Grandpa was already battling the lung cancer that would eventually take him. Still, he doted on both of us, though Scott was too young to really remember him now. After Grandpa died, family dynamics shifted subtly. My parents, Michael and Karen, both worked full-time jobs. Dad as a sales manager at an electronics store, and Mom as an administrative assistant at a local insurance company. We were comfortably middle class, neither rich nor poor, or so I thought. Grandmother Alice continued the Sunday dinner tradition after Grandpa's passing, though the house felt emptier without his booming laugh. I would often help her in the kitchen while my parents watched football with Scott, who showed an early interest in sports. "Your grandfather was so proud of you," Grandma would say as we rolled out pie dough. "He had such high hopes for your future." I didn't understand the full meaning of those words until many years later. As I entered my teen years, certain patterns emerged in our household. Scott, 4 years my junior, began receiving an increasing amount of attention and resources. When he needed sports equipment, it appeared. When he wanted to attend expensive basketball camps, my parents found a way to make it happen. Meanwhile, I was encouraged to be practical and independent. When I needed new clothes, we shopped clearance racks. When I wanted to join the school orchestra, my parents explained that instrument rentals were too expensive, suggesting I focus on academics instead. "You're so smart and capable, Jessica," Mom would say. "You'll go far with that brain of yours." The praise was genuine, but always came with the unspoken expectation that I would achieve success through self-reliance, while Scott received active investment and support. I didn't question this dynamic at the time. In many families, there's a tacit understanding that different children have different needs. Scott was the athlete with dreams of sports scholarships. I was the bookworm who could fend for myself. It seemed natural, if sometimes unfair. My parents weren't cruel or neglectful. They attended my academic ceremonies, praised my report cards, and expressed pride in my accomplishments. But there was always a difference in how they approached our respective needs and wants, a difference I attributed to personality and gender expectations, rather than any deeper disparity. So I adapted. I got a part-time job at 16, working at the local library after school. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I learned to budget, to save, to stretch resources. In many ways, these lessons served me well. But I couldn't help noticing how Scott never had to learn these skills. When he turned 16, our parents surprised him with a used car, not fancy, but reliable transportation, that gave him freedom I had never experienced at his age. When I asked about getting a car of my own, the answer was clear. "We've already stretched our budget for Scott's car. You're welcome to use Mom's when she's not working, or you can save up for your own." So I continued walking or taking the bus to my job and activities, adding car savings to my financial goals alongside college funds. By senior year, I had been accepted to several good colleges, including my dream school, Northwestern University. But reality hit hard when financial aid packages arrived. Even with scholarships, the cost was daunting. "We just don't have the money for Northwestern," Dad explained gently but firmly. "State University has offered you nearly a full ride. That's the sensible choice." I was disappointed, but understood. We had modest means and practical choices were necessary. I committed to State University, deferring my Northwestern dreams. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover for more than a decade, was that there should have been money for Northwestern. Money specifically designated for my education by my grandfather. Money that had mysteriously never materialized in my college fund. Money that, as I would later learn, had been redirected elsewhere without my knowledge. College life at State University was everything I'd expected: challenging classes, newfound independence, and constant financial stress. Unlike many of my peers who received parental support, I was essentially on my own financially from day one. My freshman year roommate Zoe came from a similar middle-class background, but had a completely different college experience. Her parents had established a college fund when she was born, providing her with enough to cover expenses beyond tuition and housing. She didn't need to work during the academic year, allowing her to focus entirely on studies and campus activities. "My parents always said college was my only job," she explained when I rushed from study group to my campus job at the library. Meanwhile, I juggled a full course load with 20 hours of work each week. I took extra credits every semester, aiming to graduate early and reduce my mounting student loans. Sleep became a luxury as I balanced academics work and the occasional social outing to maintain my sanity. During this time, Scott was thriving in high school. His basketball team made it to state finals, and my parents rarely missed a game, even those requiring overnight travel. I understood their pride, but couldn't help feeling a twinge of hurt when they missed my induction into the Academic Honor Society, because it conflicted with one of Scott's tournaments. "We're so sorry, honey," Mom said on the phone. "You know we'd be there if we could. Take pictures." I nodded, though she couldn't see me swallowing the lump in my throat. Of course. Good luck to Scott. Holidays and summer breaks brought me home, where the contrast between Scott's life and mine became increasingly apparent. The summer after my sophomore year, my parents renovated our basement into a deluxe bedroom suite for Scott, complete with a private bathroom and game area. "He needs space for team gatherings," Dad explained while giving me a tour of the construction. "This will be great for team bonding." I was still in my childhood bedroom, unchanged since high school, except for the boxes of my belongings that couldn't fit in my cramped dorm room. That same summer, I noticed Scott sporting new designer clothes and the latest smartphone. When I mentioned needing to replace my 3-year-old phone that was barely functioning, Mom suggested I check for sales or consider a less expensive model. "Your brother's phone was a gift from your aunt," she explained quickly when I pointed out the disparity. "You know how she spoils him." I had no reason to doubt her. Aunt Melissa had always been especially fond of Scott. It seemed plausible she would buy him expensive gifts, though I wondered why her generosity never extended to me. By junior year, the financial strain was taking a toll. I had maxed out my federal student loans and was considering private loans to cover the gap in my senior year expenses. During a weekend visit home, I broached the subject with my parents, hoping they might be able to help even minimally. "We're stretched pretty thin right now," Dad said, looking uncomfortable. "Scott's travel team expenses have increased, and we're saving for his college fund." "I understand," I said, though I was struggling to hide my frustration. "I was just hoping you might be able to help with books next semester, or maybe part of my housing." Mom exchanged glances with Dad. "We'll see what we can do, but don't count on it. You've always been so independent, Jessica. We know you'll figure it out." Their confidence in me should have felt like a compliment. Instead, it felt like abandonment disguised as faith in my capabilities. That Christmas, Scott received a high-end laptop for school, though he mainly used it for gaming and social media. I received practical gifts: winter boots to replace my worn ones, and gift cards for groceries and gas. Useful, certainly, but the disparity was becoming harder to ignore. "We know you needed the boots," Mom said, when she noticed my expression. "We thought you'd prefer practical gifts you can really use." She wasn't wrong. I did need the boots, But just once, I wanted something that wasn't purely functional, something that acknowledged I deserved joy as well as necessities. After graduation, I moved to Chicago for an entry-level position at a marketing firm. The salary was modest, but offered growth potential. More importantly, it included health benefits, which I desperately needed after aging out of my parents' insurance. My student loan payments kicked in 6 months later, consuming nearly a third of my monthly income. I lived with two roommates in a cramped apartment, brought lunch from home every day, and carefully tracked every dollar. Dating was a luxury I rarely indulged in, and travel was out of the question beyond occasional bus trips home for major holidays. Meanwhile, Scott was starting his freshman year at State University on a partial basketball scholarship. My parents had moved him into a well-appointed dorm room and purchased a new laptop, furniture, and decor to ensure his comfort. His social media posts showed frequent restaurant meals, weekend trips, and new clothes, the college experience I had only observed from the outside. When I called home, conversations inevitably centered around Scott's games, his adjustment to college life, and his social activities. My own challenges, a difficult boss crushing loan payments, career uncertainties, were acknowledged briefly before the topic shifted back to Scott. I tried not to be resentful. Scott was a good kid, not malicious or entitled by nature. He simply accepted what was given to him, never questioning why he received so much, while I received so little. Why would he? From his perspective, this was normal family dynamics. And perhaps it was I thought. Perhaps I was overly sensitive or expecting too much. After all, my parents weren't obligated to support me through college or into adulthood. Many people succeed despite having far less family support than I had received, so I buried my hurt feelings and focused on building my life. I worked hard, earned promotions, made friends, and slowly created a community in Chicago. I managed my finances carefully, making minimum payments on my student loans while trying to build an emergency fund. I was 26, 4 years into my career, and finally feeling somewhat stable financially, when a letter arrived that would begin unraveling everything I thought I knew about my family. The envelope bore my grandmother's familiar handwriting, instantly recognizable from the birthday cards she'd sent throughout my life. Opening it, I found a greeting card with a brief note. "Dearest Jessica, I'm so proud of the woman you've become. I've been thinking a lot about William lately and thought you might like to have this. It was always meant for you. Love, Grandma Alice." Inside the card was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 12 years earlier, just after Grandpa's death. It was from the business section of our local paper with the headline, "Local Businessman William Anderson Leaves Legacy of Education." The short article mentioned that William Anderson, founder of Anderson Construction, had established two educational trusts for his grandchildren before his passing, ensuring his legacy would continue through their academic pursuits. Two educational trusts for his grandchildren, plural. I read the clipping several times, confusion mounting. If Grandpa had established trusts for both Scott and me, why had I never known about mine? Why had I struggled through college, working multiple jobs and accumulating significant debt? If there was money specifically designated for my education, I immediately called my grandmother. At 78, she still lived independently in the home she had shared with my grandfather, though she had recently begun talking about downsizing. "Grandma, I got your card," I said after our initial greetings. "The newspaper clipping about Grandpa's trusts I don't understand. Was there really a trust for me?" There was a long pause. "You didn't know?" Her voice was barely audible. "William set up trusts for both his grandchildren. Yours was supposed to activate when you turned 18, primarily for college, then continue monthly payments until you're 35. He believed in giving young people a strong start." My hands were shaking. "Grandma, I never received anything from a trust. Not for college, not monthly payments, nothing." The silence that followed was heavy with realization. "But your parents, they were trustees until you turned 25. After that, the trust was supposed to transfer directly to your control." "I'm 30 now, Grandma. I've never had access to or information about any trust." "That can't be right." she said, her voice strengthening with conviction. William was very clear about his wishes. We discussed it extensively. Both of you were to be provided for equally. The implications were too enormous to process in that moment. If the trust existed, but I hadn't received the funds, where had the money gone? And who had been controlling it all these years? Do you know how much should have been in the trust? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Initially, it was $200,000 each, invested conservatively with specific provisions for education expenses. After college, the remaining funds were to provide monthly support of $1,500 until you reached 35, when you would receive any remaining principal. William believed that would be enough time for you both to establish yourselves while having a safety net. $200,000. The figure struck me like a physical blow. That would have covered Northwestern and graduate school if I'd wanted to pursue an advanced degree. It would have prevented the crippling loan debt that still consumed a significant portion of my monthly budget. The monthly payments would have allowed me to live in a safer neighborhood, build savings, perhaps even buy a home. Grandma, I need to understand exactly what happened. Do you have any documentation about the trusts? The original paperwork maybe, or the name of Grandpa's attorney? I should have something in William's files. Let me look and call you back. I spent the next hour in a daze, pacing my small apartment trying to make sense of what I had just learned. Was it possible my parents had somehow accessed my trust without my knowledge? Had they spent the money designated for my future on themselves or on Scott? Or was there a more innocent explanation? A bank error? A misunderstanding about the terms? Or some legal complication Grandma called back later that evening? I found the trust documents, she said without preamble. Both trusts were established identically with your parents as trustees for both until you each turned 25. Scott's trust is still under their control since he's only 24, but yours should have transferred to you 5 years ago. Do you have any statements showing activity on the accounts? I asked. I have annual statements that the attorney sends me, though I admit I haven't looked at them carefully in recent years. I always assumed everything was proceeding as William intended. Her voice cracked. Jessica, if something improper has happened, I hold myself partly responsible for not monitoring more closely. This isn't your fault, Grandma. Despite my inner turmoil, I found myself comforting her. Could you send me copies of everything you have I need to get a complete picture before I decide what to do? She agreed, and 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived, containing trust documents, annual statements, and a letter from my grandfather to be given to me on my 18th birthday, a letter I had never received. The evidence was damning. According to the statements, regular withdrawals had been made from my trust throughout my college years, consistent with educational expenses, but the money had never reached me or my university. After college, the monthly distributions of $1,500 had been regularly withdrawn, but again I had never seen a penny. Most disturbing were transfers between my trust and Scott's. When his trust ran low from excessive withdrawals, money was moved from mine to cover the difference. By the time I turned 25, when control should have transferred to me, my trust had been nearly depleted. Rather than alerting me to my inheritance, my parents had continued to serve as trustees, draining the remaining funds. The letter from my grandfather was perhaps the most painful part. Written in his distinctive handwriting, it explained his hopes that the trust would allow me to pursue my dreams without financial constraints. He expressed pride in me and confidence that I would use the resources wisely. Reading his words, knowing how different my life might have been had I received his gift as intended, brought me to tears. I spent weeks researching trust law, consulting with financial advisors, and trying to reconstruct exactly what had happened. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. My parents had systematically diverted my inheritance, using it to fund not only Scott's education and expenses, but also family vacations, home renovations, and other costs entirely unrelated to my welfare. By my calculations, they had misappropriated over $300,000 that should have been mine, the original principal plus investment growth, minus legitimate educational expenses that should have been covered. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? Confronting your parents about financial betrayal isn't a scenario covered in etiquette books or psychology classes. I spent days drafting and discarding approaches, oscillating between cold fury and desperate hope, for an innocent explanation. Eventually, I decided that such a conversation needed to happen in person. I requested a week off work and booked a flight home without informing my parents of my plans. The element of surprise seemed necessary. I didn't want them preparing a defense or concocting a story before I arrived. Grandma Alice was my ally in this difficult mission. She offered her home as neutral territory and suggested coordinating with my Aunt Melissa, my father's sister, who had often served as a mediator in family disagreements. "This won't be easy, Jessica," Aunt Melissa warned when I called her. "But you deserve answers, and more than that, you deserve justice. I'll be there." The plan was simple. Grandma would invite my parents and Scott to Sunday dinner, a normal family gathering that wouldn't raise suspicions. I would arrive shortly before the meal, accompanied by Aunt Melissa for moral support. The confrontation would happen after dinner with documentation ready to counter any denials. I arrived at my grandmother's house an hour early, my stomach in knots. Aunt Melissa met me there, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered and helping me organize my thoughts. "Remember, stay calm and stick to facts," she advised. "Emotional accusations will only give them room to dismiss you as irrational." When my parents' car pulled into the driveway, I moved to the kitchen out of sight from the front entrance. I heard their cheerful greetings to Grandma, the casual conversation about traffic and weather, Scott's animated description of a recent game. They sounded like a normal, loving family, the family I had always believed we were. Dinner was surreal. I emerged from the kitchen just as everyone was being called to the table, creating a moment of shocked silence, followed by awkward exclamation. "Ah, Jessica, what a surprise! Why didn't you tell us you were coming? How long are you staying?" I answered with vague pleasantries, watching their faces carefully. My mother seemed genuinely pleased to see me, though slightly confused by my unexpected appearance. My father's reaction was more guarded, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Scott was openly happy, giving me a bear hug that momentarily made me question what I was about to do. He wasn't responsible for our parents' actions after all. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed around safe topics: my job, Scott's classes, local news, Grandma's garden. I contributed minimally, my mind focused on the confrontation to come. No one seemed to notice my distraction except Aunt Melissa, who occasionally squeezed my hand under the table in silent support. After dessert, as my mother began to clear plates, Grandma Alice cleared her throat. "Before everyone disperses, Jessica has something important to discuss with the family." All eyes turned to me. The moment had arrived. "I recently learned some information that has been disturbing," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "Information about financial matters that affect me directly." My father shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "What kind of financial matters?" I removed the folder of documents from my bag and placed it on the table. "I learned about Grandpa Will's educational trusts, the ones he established for Scott and me before he died." The color drained from my mother's face. My father's expression hardened into a defensive mask. Scott looked genuinely confused. "What trusts?" he asked, looking between our parents. "I don't know anything about trusts." "That's because you're not supposed to until you're 25, my father said quickly, then seemed to regret speaking. I pressed on. "Grandpa established identical trusts for both of us, $200,000 each to be used for our education, and then to provide monthly support until we turned 35. I looked directly at my parents. "I never received a penny from mine. Not for Northwestern, which I couldn't attend because supposedly there wasn't enough money. Not for any of my educational expenses. And certainly not the $1,500 monthly payments that should have been coming to me since graduation." My mother began to cry silently, staring at her hands in her lap. My father's jaw tightened. "We made the decisions we thought were best for the family as a whole," he said stiffly. "Best for the family." I repeated, incredulity creeping into my voice despite my resolve to remain calm. How was depleting my entire inheritance in favor of Scott's best for the family? How was letting me struggle through college, working multiple jobs while Scott received everything he wanted best for the family? How was allowing me to accumulate tens of thousands in student loan debt when money specifically designated for my education was available best for the family? Scott was looking increasingly disturbed. Wait, what I don't understand. Aunt Melissa intervened. Scott, your grandfather left equal trusts for both you and Jessica. Your parents were trustees until each of you turned 25. Jessica's trust should have transferred to her control 5 years ago, but instead your parents continued managing it and apparently spending the funds. On what? Scott asked, a dawning horror in his eyes. I slid the annual statements across the table. On your travel teams, on the basement renovation for your team gatherings, on family vacations scheduled around your tournaments, on your car, on your laptop, on your college expenses that weren't covered by your partial scholarship. He looked stricken. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I assured him. This isn't about you. It's about the choices Mom and Dad made. My father had been scanning the statements, his expression growing increasingly defensive. You're making it sound like we stole from you. We were legally trustees. We made investment decisions we thought were appropriate. Spending my educational trust on Scott and family expenses wasn't an investment decision, I countered. And continuing to control the trust after I turned 25 was legally questionable at best, fraudulent at worst. We meant to tell you about the trust, my mother said tearfully. But there were always expenses, always needs. Scott's opportunities couldn't wait. We thought we could replace the funds before you needed to know. Replace them with what? I asked. The trusts were identical. If mine is depleted, how is Scott's still funded? A heavy silence fell over the table. My grandmother, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. Michael Karen, answer your daughter's question. If Jessica's trust is empty, where did Scott's money come from? My father looked away. My mother's tears flowed faster. They'd been putting their own money into Scott's trust, Aunt Melissa realized aloud. They drained Jessica's for family expenses, and Scott's needs then used their own money to keep Scott's trust funded, while leaving Jessica with nothing. The betrayal was even deeper than I had imagined. Not only had they diverted my inheritance, but they had actively chosen to replenish Scott's fund while leaving mine empty. The message couldn't have been clearer about who they valued more. Is this true? Grandma Alice demanded, her gentle demeanor giving way to fierce indignation. My father finally met my eyes. You've always been so capable, Jessica. So independent. Scott needed more support, more advantages to succeed. So you stole from me to give to him. The words came out raw, despite my efforts to maintain composure. How is that different from saying he matters more, that his future is more important than mine? That's not what my mother began, isn't it? I cut her off. Actions speak louder than words, Mom. And your actions have been shouting for years that Scott is the priority, that his needs supersede mine, that his potential matters more than mine. Scott pushed back from the table. I can't be part of this, he said, his voice shaking. I never asked for any of this. I never wanted Jessica to suffer so I could have basketball camps and laptops and… God, all this time I thought… He stood and walked out of the dining room, the front door slamming moments later. My father's composure finally broke. We never meant to hurt you, Jessica. We just wanted what was best for everyone. No, I corrected him. You wanted what was easiest for you. It was easier to use my money than to tell Scott no sometimes. It was easier to let me struggle than to manage your finances responsibly. It was easier to betray Grandpa's wishes than to honor them. What do you want from us now? My father asked, a defensive edge returning to his voice. The money's gone. We can't change the past. Actually, there are several things you can do, I said, pulling out another document. I've consulted with a financial advisor and an attorney. Here are my terms for not pursuing legal action for breach of fiduciary duty and trust fraud. My father's face paled as I slid the paper toward him. It outlined a repayment plan for the misappropriated funds, beginning with an immediate transfer of any remaining money in Scott's trust to me, followed by monthly payments until the full amount was restored. This is impossible, he sputtered. We don't have this kind of money. You found money to keep Scott's trust intact, I pointed out. And you found money for a cruise last year, according to your Facebook photos. You'll find money for this too. Or we can let a court decide. You would sue your own parents. My mother looked heartbroken. You stole my inheritance, I replied evenly. The inheritance my grandfather specifically designated for my future. You let me struggle unnecessarily for years while ensuring Scott had every advantage. What would you call an appropriate response to that level of betrayal? No one had an answer. I stood up gathering my documents. I'll give you 1 week to consider the terms. After that, I'll proceed with legal action. I turned to my grandmother and aunt. Thank you both for your support. I couldn't have done this without you. As I walked out of my grandmother's house, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication and sorrow, determination and exhaustion. The family I had always known was irrevocably changed by what had happened that evening. Whether something new and healthier could emerge from the ashes remained to be seen. What I did know with absolute certainty was that I would no longer allow myself to be the afterthought, the one who could be sacrificed for others' benefit. Whatever happened next, I would demand the respect and consideration I deserved, not only from my family, but from myself. The week following the confrontation passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction of looming deadlines and client meetings. My phone remained eerily silent. No calls from my parents. No texts from Scott. Not even the usual family group chat messages that I'd grown accustomed to ignoring. Only Grandma Alice and Aunt Melissa maintained contact, checking in daily with updates. According to Aunt Melissa, my parents had gone into damage control mode, consulting with their own attorney about their options. They're hoping to negotiate, she reported during one of our calls. They know they can't fight the basic facts, but they want more time, lower payments. I'm not interested in negotiations that further delay justice, I replied. They've had my money for 12 years. That's long enough. On the 6th day, just as I was preparing to contact my attorney to proceed with legal action, an email arrived from my father. The subject line was simple: acceptance of terms. The message was brief and businesslike, lacking any emotional acknowledgement of the harm done. He agreed to my repayment terms, including the immediate transfer of the funds remaining in Scott's trust. A scanned document with both my parents' signatures was attached. I forwarded everything to my attorney, who confirmed the agreement appeared legally sound. It's unusual for these matters to resolve so quickly without court involvement, he noted. You must have had very compelling evidence. The evidence was compelling? I agreed. But I think what really motivated them was fear not just of legal consequences, but of public exposure. My parents have always been very concerned with appearances. The first payment arrived in my account 3 days later, a transfer of $83,000, representing the remaining balance of Scott's trust. It was less than a third of what they owed me in total, but it was a start, and more importantly, a tangible acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done. I used part of the money to pay down my highest interest student loans, a practical decision that nevertheless felt emotionally significant. This was what the money had been intended for all along, easing my financial burdens as I established my adult life. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Scott reached out via text. Can we talk not about money, just brother to sister? We met at a coffee shop during my next visit home, an awkward reunion filled with long pauses and careful word choices. Scott had lost weight and looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. I want you to know I had no idea, he began after we'd exchanged pleasantries. About the trusts, about where the money for my stuff was coming from. I would never have accepted any of it if I'd known it was at your expense. I believe you, I assured him. This isn't about you, Scott. It never was. It's about the choices Mom and Dad made. He nodded, staring into his coffee cup. They're different now, quieter. Dad's working overtime and Mom's selling her jewelry collection. I think they're liquidating assets to make the payments. I felt a twinge of something, not quite guilt, but a complex emotion I couldn't immediately identify. They made commitments to me and to Grandpa that they didn't honor. Now they're facing the consequences. I know, I'm not defending them. He hesitated. I've been thinking a lot about our childhood, seeing everything differently now. All those times they said yes to me and no to you, it wasn't fair. And I benefited from that unfairness without ever questioning it. His insight surprised me. You were a child, Scott. Children aren't supposed to question when their parents give them things. But I'm not a child anymore, he countered. And I want to make it right somehow. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Just be a good brother. That's enough. Over the following months, a new normal gradually established itself. My parents made the agreed upon payments, though our personal relationship remained strained. Our conversations when they occurred were superficial and brief. I wasn't ready to forgive, and they weren't ready to truly acknowledge the depth of their betrayal beyond the financial restitution. Grandma Alice became an even more important figure in my life. Our Sunday phone calls became a cherished ritual, a connection to the grandfather I had loved and who had tried to provide for me even after his death. William would be so proud of you, Bai, she told me during one of these calls, not just for standing up for yourself, but for how you've handled all of this with dignity. I hoped she was right. I had questioned myself repeatedly in the aftermath of the confrontation, wondering if I had been too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I would remember the years of struggle, the opportunities missed, the casual dismissal of my needs in favor of Scott's, and my resolve would strengthen. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about honoring my grandfather's wishes, and about establishing that I would no longer accept being valued less than my brother. 6 months after the confrontation, I used part of the repayment money to make a down payment on a small condo in Chicago, my first real estate purchase. As I signed the closing documents, I thought of my grandfather and how pleased he would be to see his gift finally fulfilling its intended purpose, giving me a solid foundation for my future. Around the same time, I received an unexpected letter from Scott. Inside was a cashier's check for $20,000 and a handwritten note. Jessica, I know this doesn't begin to address the imbalance between us, but it's what I can do right now. This is my entire savings from my first year of full-time work. I want you to have it, not as charity or pity, but as a small step toward making things right. I benefited unfairly from what should have been yours. I can't change that, but I can acknowledge it and do what I can to correct it going forward. With love and respect, Scott. I called him immediately. Scott, I can't accept this. This is your money earned through your own work. Please take it, he insisted. It's important to me. I've been losing sleep thinking about how different your life would have been if things had been fair between us. After much discussion, we compromised. I accepted half the amount, with the agreement that the rest would go into his own savings. Your financial security matters too, I told him. We can work toward healing without creating new imbalances. A year after discovering the truth, I found myself in a surprisingly good place, financially more secure than I had ever been, emotionally stronger for having advocated for myself, and beginning to rebuild certain family relationships on healthier foundations. My parents remained at arm's length, our interactions civil but distant. Whether we would ever fully reconcile remained an open question, dependent on their willingness to acknowledge the full emotional impact of their actions beyond the financial restitution. Scott and I, however, had developed a closer relationship than we'd ever had before. The truth, painful as it was, had cleared away the unconscious resentment I had harbored and the unearned privilege he had never questioned. In its place was growing a more authentic connection based on mutual respect and understanding. Grandma Alice thrived in her new role as family truth teller, no longer willing to look the other way when she saw concerning patterns. William always said I was too accommodating, she admitted during one of our conversations. It took me too long to find my voice, but I won't be silent again when something isn't right. As for me, the experience had transformed how I viewed myself and my place in the world. I had always thought of myself as independent out of necessity rather than choice. Now I recognize that self-reliance is a strength that had prepared me to stand up for myself when it mattered most. More importantly, I had learned that acceptance didn't mean acquiescence. For years, I had accepted the family dynamic without challenging its fundamental unfairness. I had dimly perceived the disparity in how Scott and I were treated, but had normalized it rather than questioning it. Never again would I allow myself to be treated as less worthy or less deserving than someone else. The painful lessons of this experience had taught me the importance of setting boundaries, demanding respect, and refusing to accept inequitable treatment, even perhaps especially from those closest to me. 3 years have passed since that fateful Sunday dinner, when I confronted my parents about the trust. In that time, much has changed while some things remain unresolved. The financial restitution continues according to the agreement. Every month, the payments arrive punctually, a consistent reminder of both the betrayal and the accountability that followed. Nearly half of the misappropriated funds have now been repaid, slowly restoring what was taken from me. I've used the money thoughtfully, honoring my grandfather's intentions. My student loans are now fully paid off, lifting a burden that had shaped so many of my decisions for years. My condo is a place of peace and security. I've established a healthy emergency fund and retirement savings, addressing the financial insecurity that had been my constant companion since college. Most surprisingly, I've started my own business, a marketing consultancy, specializing in educational institutions and nonprofits. The monthly payments from the restitution agreement provided the safety net I needed to take this entrepreneurial risk, one I would never have considered while drowning in student debt. My relationship with Scott has evolved into something stronger than I could have imagined. Initially, I worried that the revelations about our parents' financial favoritism would create an irreparable rift between us. Instead, it became the foundation for a more honest connection. Scott completed his education and began teaching physical education at a local high school, coaching basketball in the afternoons. He found purpose in working with kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, perhaps unconsciously addressing the privilege he had unquestioningly enjoyed for so many years. I tell my students that success isn't about having things handed to you, he shared during a recent visit. It's about working hard and treating people fairly along the way. I smiled, recognizing how much he had grown. Grandpa would approve of that message. The situation with my parents remains more complicated. The early months after the confrontation were characterized by their minimization and deflection. They focused exclusively on the financial aspect, seemingly unable or unwilling to acknowledge the deeper emotional harm their actions had caused. "We're paying you back," my father would say whenever deeper conversations were attempted. "What more do you want from us?" What I wanted, of course, was something money couldn't buy: genuine recognition of how their choices had communicated, that Scott mattered more, that his potential deserved nurturing, while mine could be sacrificed. I wanted acknowledgement of the opportunities lost, the unnecessary struggles endured, the fundamental unfairness of it all. About 18 months after the confrontation, my mother reached out independently, asking to meet without my father present. Over lunch at a quiet restaurant, she offered something approaching the apology I had been waiting for. "I failed you as a mother," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. We told ourselves we were making practical decisions based on different needs, but the truth is, we fell into patterns of favoritism that weren't fair to you. Scott was easier. He asked directly for what he wanted. While you were always so self-sufficient, we could convince ourselves you were fine. Her words weren't perfect, still containing subtle deflections, but they represented progress and acknowledgement that went beyond the financial restitution to address the emotional impact of their actions. "I appreciated your self-reliance," she continued, "but I see now that we exploited it instead of nurturing it. We should have been as invested in your dreams as we were in Scott's." That lunch marked a turning point in our relationship. We began talking more regularly, cautiously rebuilding trust. She started seeing a therapist to work through her own patterns and choices, a step that impressed me with its commitment to genuine change. My father has been slower to evolve. He maintains a certain defensive distance, participating in family gatherings, but rarely engaging in meaningful conversation. His pride was deeply wounded by the confrontation and its aftermath. His self-image as a good provider and fair parent shattered by the evidence of his own actions. Recently, however, there have been small signs of potential change. Last month, he helped me move some furniture into my new office space, a practical gesture of support for my business venture. As we worked, he asked thoughtful questions about my clients and approach, showing interest in this new chapter of my life. "Your grandfather was an entrepreneur too," he remarked as we finished. "He started with nothing but determination and built something significant. You remind me of him sometimes." Coming from my father, this comparison to Grandpa Will felt like a tentative olive branch. I accepted it as such, responding with a simple, Thank you. That means a lot. Whether our relationship will ever fully heal remains uncertain. Some betrayals leave permanent scars and trust. Once broken, rebuild slowly, if at all. What matters is that I no longer need their approval or support to validate my worth. I have proven to myself that I can stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it means confronting those who should have protected me. Grandma Alice, now in her 80s, continues to be my most stalwart supporter. We talk weekly, and I visit monthly, treasuring her presence in my life. She often shares stories about Grandpa Will that help me feel connected to the man who tried to secure my future even after he was gone. He always said you had his spirit, she told me recently. Now I truly understand what he meant. You have his integrity, his determination to do what's right regardless of difficulty. The experience has shaped how I approach other relationships as well. I'm more attentive to patterns of inequity, quicker to address unfairness when I see it, and less willing to accept treatment that diminishes my worth. At the same time, I'm more appreciative of authentic connections, more deliberate in nurturing relationships built on mutual respect and consideration. Scott married last year, and I stood beside him as his best person, a role that symbolized our reconstructed sibling bond. During his speech at the reception, he unexpectedly addressed our journey. My sister taught me the most important lesson of my life, he said, raising his glass in my direction. That true family isn't about what you're given, but about how you see and value each other. I'm still learning from her example every day. His words brought tears to my eyes, and I noticed to our mothers as well. Even our father seemed moved, though he masked it quickly behind his customary reserve. As for my grandfather's legacy, it extends far beyond the financial provision he made. His true gift was showing me what integrity looks like, the consistency between values and actions that defined his life and that I strive to embody in mine. I sometimes wonder what he would think about how everything unfolded. Would he be saddened by my parents' betrayal of his wishes? Certainly. But I believe he would be proud of how I eventually stood up for myself, insisting on the respect and fairness he had intended. The journey hasn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, nights spent questioning whether confronting the truth was worth the family turmoil that followed. But looking at where I am now, financially secure, professionally fulfilled, surrounded by relationships based on authentic connection rather than obligation, I know without question that bringing the truth to light was the right choice. If you're facing a similar situation, inequity within your family, financial betrayal, or patterns of favoritism, know that you deserve better. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that ultimately creates the possibility for healthier relationships. Have you ever discovered unfairness in your family dynamics? How did you address it? Share your experience in the comments below. And if my story has resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with anyone who might need encouragement to advocate for themselves. Remember that speaking your truth, even when it's difficult, is often the first step toward creating the life and relationships you truly deserve. Thank you for listening to my journey.